Okay, everybody got your pen and your pencil there. The two types of brake power boosters are vacuum assisted and electronic assisted. Is that true or is that false? Wait a minute. Have you ever seen an electronically assisted power brake booster?
No.
Well, then why did you say it was true? I don't understand it.
I was thinking just vacuum.
It was guessing what it was because you knew it was either going to be true or false, right?
It's one or the other, but I wasn't guessing. I was thinking vacuum, and then I got realized when I said electric, I was like,
Power, vacuum assisted and electronic assisted. How is electronics going to assist? On the hybrid, the electronics can assist the brakes, can't they? Yeah, what we
so
did.
that'd be true.
What was funny was Craig had this handle that you turned. It was hooked to one of those motors, mounted to a board, and you turn that handle. And he had 3 different hookups on that thing. And whenever he says, hey, power and ground, he says, all right, now you're turning this. He says, now then, well, he actually had it plugged in with a little power supply going to it. And so you flip these switches. And he says, now keep turning it. And it was fairly easy to turn. You could tell that you were turning something there. He flipped one of those switches. It got hard. And then he flipped the other switch, and it was like, man, you couldn't move it. It was like, and that's how it was actually the same part that is in the transaxle on these hybrid vehicles that use the brakes to generate power to charge up the battery. Because whenever you do that, all of a sudden, when this thing starts generating power, it puts resistance. It's kind of like, whenever your alternator starts putting out, it pulls the engine down. It's an extreme version of that. So you hit the brake, and now all of a sudden, there's some differences in the way that it's wired that have taken place because of some of the electronics, and it starts putting current back in the battery. If you're driving a Ford Fusion and you do a lot of stopping and you happen to have the scan tool looking at your battery voltage, it'll go up to 600 volts. If you stop a lot, when you're stopping, that's when it's charging the doggone battery, and it's cramming that voltage in there really fast too.
So that'd be true, because
actually, that one is false. According to if you want to get that one right, you're going to put false. Because basically, what is the other kind that they're talking about here? This was before they even knew anything about hybrids much. This book here. That's the two basic types is what they're talking about. Not just, you can actually find anything to support any argument if you want to on that.
vacuum and hydraulic.
Vacuum and hydraulic would be the one that's run off the power steering pump. And why do they use those? Why do they use any of them running off the power steering pump? You ever think about that? They have room for a booster. The engines, like some of your Mustangs, the engine's compartment's so full of engine, there's no room for a booster in there. But that little hydraulic unit, is only about this big around.
The way they've actually got mine's that big, but it's that far into the firewall also. So that you actually have a booster this big, it's just half of it's hidden.
Yeah, but why does the booster have to be big?
To multiply the force to get to the brakes.
Well, yeah, because you got PSI there. You got to have a lot of area on that piston. On that diaphragm. Because whenever you mash your brake, you're actually dumping the vacuum from behind the diaphragm and letting atmosphere in there. So you're sealing the vacuum in front of the diaphragm. Whenever you ain't got your foot on the brake, vacuum's on both sides of the diaphragm. Well, when you mash the brake, you're losing the vacuum that's on the back side of the diaphragm and letting atmosphere in, and the atmosphere is what's helping you mash the brake.
So the vacuum on the motor is reapplied to...
The vacuum, it's always there. The vacuum of the motor never goes away. But it's stored. It's only, whenever you got your vacuum booster here, like that, and here's your diaphragm. To extremely simplify this thing, you got vacuum applied right here, and there's valving in here that basically it lets the vacuum be the same here as it is here. So you got atmosphere pushing in outside this metal shell. Of course, your master cylinder, is right here with its lines coming off, and it's got a push rod going in here to the center of this. All right, so when you apply the brake, you're actually moving a little spool valve, and it dumps the vacuum that's here. This vacuum in here stays in there, and this atmospheric pressure is pushing against there, and that's what helps it. So you're basically, because of the little valve that you got in there, there's 2 or 3 little states of that.
Is the valve going bad what causes the brake booster to go bad?
It can, if that valve does, sticks or does something it's not supposed to be. But typically what you're going to find, we had this one, you remember that the master cylinder was leaking really bad on George Showalter's, and it had a bunch of brake fluid in it. But also this diaphragm can just bust or go bad, or if it gets brake fluid or oil or anything like that inside of it, it'll go sour. And, that's just pretty important to recognize. Yeah. All right. Okay. Automatic gate 2. Let me see what the next one is. Atmospheric pressure acting on the pedal side of the booster diaphragm results in boosted pressure to the master cylinder's primary piston.
True.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That is correct. That's what I just explained. Brakes will no longer work after the vacuum's been used. Let me ask you this. How would you find out if your brake booster is a bad one? I'm talking about a vacuum brake booster. How you find out? How you find out if it's working? What I'm going to do is I'm going to, you typically got one brake application after you lose your engine vacuum, right? Like if the engine dies, the first time you hit the brake, you still got power brakes. The second time you ain't. All right. So I want to switch off the engine. I'm going to pump the brake pedal 2 or 3 times so I can get rid of the, whatever stored vacuum is in there, right? Okay. After I've done that, then I'm going to keep my foot on the brake pedal. I'm going to start it up, and I'm going to see if the pedal goes down. If the pedal goes down when you start it up, you got vacuum being fed to the booster and it's working like it's supposed to. If it's not working like it's supposed to, the first thing you're going to look at your vacuum source. One time there was a pickup truck that was sitting there that had been, this guy said, I'll buy this pickup truck if he can fix this noise that it's making, because it was a brand new pickup that's on the lot. But when you give it the gas, it would go under the hood. It's a nasty noise. And of course, every time, and it sounded just like it was coming from the throttle body area. It was crazy. And these guys that replaced the throttle body, gasket, and some other stuff, they didn't know what to do. And I just happened to go walking by there, and it caught my attention when I heard that whistle. What is that racket? And so they were scratching their heads trying to figure out what to do. But I got a piece of hose and put it in my ear, and I'm just listening around, and it was that little vacuum brake booster check valve that was split. And so I said, that's that check valve. That's what's wrong with it. And so when they put a check valve on it, the guy bought the truck, and the sales manager came the next day and gave me $10, and he says, buy some lunch. You didn't have to do that, because it was quitting time and everybody was headed for this, but I stopped to help these guys for a second. And I'm telling you, if you got a good boss man, they'll appreciate stuff you do like that, you see. Anyway, that's number 3 is obviously false. Brakes will work after all vacuums been used. They're not going to have your power steering, and your power brakes are still going to work even if the hydraulics assist is gone, or the vacuum assist. Hydraulic boost is constant even if the engine is under load.
True.
That's true. In a power master booster, power steering fluid can be added to the master cylinder reservoir with no ill effects.
False.
That is absolutely false. If you pour any kind of oil, and did you know JT did that on the Hyundai? He poured power steering fluid in the brakes master cylinder. Well, he wasn't thinking. And he realized about the time he did it that it was a mistake, and he told me, hey, I'm sorry I did this. And so we purged everything out of there. It was okay. But that was on that Hyundai when it was nearly brand new. But he just wasn't thinking. He just poured it in there. And I've had other people, I hadn't heard other people do it, but I've heard of people pouring power steering fluid in the brake master cylinder just because they weren't thinking clearly or didn't know any better, and all that. But let me ask you this. There was somebody that sent me an email in regards to my YouTube video about bleeding the power steering system, and it was a slip of the tongue. And I says, what we want to do is we put this little vacuum chamber on there where we're bleeding the power steering system. We're going to put a little cap that's got a barbed connector on it. It's a little rubber, an oil filler cap on an old Chevrolet. We pop it in the top of the reservoir because we got noisy power steering. You've heard that before? So I said, what we want to do is we want to make a low pressure area on top of in the chamber above this fluid, so that all those bubbles will leave out of there, and you'll have nothing but just fluid in there. And that was a General Motors accepted procedure. General Motors got a tool that costs about $70 to do this with. And I said, I can make one of them. So I got this little soft rubber cap that's made to pop into and I drilled and put a brass fitting, put a clear hose, and there's a little chamber here that we got. It's a little, it's got a cap with a hose nipple on one side and on the other. And basically you put your vacuum here and you hook this to your, that little cap on top of your power steering that I put in there. And under here you got fluid, but you're making low pressure here so those bubbles will come out of there. But you're going to get a little bit of fluid. Just because of the splatter effect and all that. You don't want that fluid going all the way into your engine. And why is that a problem? Well, if it happens to have any automatic transmission fluid in it, it's going to have silicone in there, and it's going to mess up the oxygen sensor. So you don't want any antifreeze or anything with silicone in it going into your intake because it's going to mess the oxygen sensor up. That's why when we decarbonize an engine with Type F transmission fluid, like what Ford used to use, it ain't got silicone in it. You can use that. Anyway, this right here, this vacuum bottle is sealed, and any fluid that happens to come through here will puddle up in here. The seal will still be drawing your...
Is that why most of the newer model vehicles, on the top of the power steering cap, they have a little nipple coming off with a hose?
Very possibly. That's not a bad... That's a good question. And I expect they probably have it set up.
I've run across it a few
Yeah, I
times.
have too. I've seen it. I've seen it a couple of times.
So that's what I was wondering if that's what that's for.
Outstanding performance. Yeah, that'd be something that'd be intelligent. But you pull that off, and you make low pressure here, and it's going to, clear it up. But one way or another, this one guy sent me an email about that, and he says, "This is really terrific." He says, "I had been doing this before with these little vacuum pumps because that's what all the TSBs tell you to do. You're supposed to pump it, pump it, pump it. Wheels off the ground, turning the wheels back and forth while you're pulling a vacuum on this." He said, "You just stand here pumping this thing for 30 minutes? That's a drag." He said, "I've never thought about doing it with the vacuum." But that's what I'm thinking, like my dad, because when my dad needed engine vacuum, he always borrowed it from the engine. Even if he's sucking down an air conditioner system, he'd use engine vacuum for that. And it works. Okay, now, that was what I was talking about, this little thing here. And I pretty much got, I started to say, this guy sent me an email and he says, "You're not supposed to have automatic transmission fluid in your power steering system." Well, yeah, that's a slip of the tongue. You're really not supposed to pour that in there. But, for the first 20 years I was in this business, a lot of people poured power steering, poured automatic transmission fluid in power steering. And, I can't definitively say that it hurts anything. It's not like pouring oil in the brake master cylinder because it's going to swell all the rubber parts up and you ain't going to have no brakes. That's a terrible mess. And so, but anyway, the long and the short of it is, I told him, I said, "Yeah, you're supposed to use, but you better be careful who made the power steering fluid. Because not all power steering fluids are created equal. You better get a good brand like Valvoline or something that you trust. This white box brand that's just got power steering fluid on the label, better watch out for that. I mean, it may be $1 a quart, but you get what you pay for. All right. So anyway, so you can't put power steering fluid in the master cylinder reservoir. That's nonsense. When testing a hydraulic pressure storage system, finding the brake pedal that's hard to push on the first application means the accumulator is leaking. If you've got a brake pedal that's hard to push on the first application, that typically means the accumulator is leaking. And the accumulator is basically where fluid pressure is stored, so you'll have some power assist all the time. You see what I'm saying?
On the first push, it still have engine vacuum. It still have vacuum.
Well, on that one, they're talking about the hydraulic.
Okay.
They're not talking about vacuum boost. Right. The accumulator, you don't have an accumulator on hydraulic brakes.
On vacuum brakes.
Vacuum brakes. You do. On hydraulic brakes, you do have an accumulator. On the ABS brakes, you've got a doggone different kind of deal. You got a bulb sticking up there. It's like this right here. And you'll see it sticking up there. It's a steel bulb, and it's got a little wrench flats on the top of it up here. And it's got a diaphragm in here that's charged up with 2,000 pounds of nitrogen pressure. And if you the ABS pump charges this up with brake fluid pressure, and that nitrogen gas is pushing down on that, and that's what gives you your boost on some of them ABS systems. You get where I'm going? All right. And that's why before you screw this thing off of there for some reason, and it screws off, it's got wrench flats up here, it's a big old ugly bulb looking thing. It's probably about that big around. Before you ever take it off, you're supposed to unplug the ABS pump and pump the brake 20 times at least to release all of that pressure. Because if you still got all that pressure on it and you screw it off, it's like an airbag going off in your face, except worse. Imagine, you remember that, you'll see that movie that's coming out, Real Steel.
Oh yeah, I want to see.
You seen the previews of that?
Yeah.
That's like having one of them robots hit you in the face with a little steel whip.
Yeah,
You want to lose your jaw and everything else, don't go there. If you see that thing, don't just screw that thing off like BI-8 and all that, it's going to tear you up. All right, so, but anyway, in order for vacuum boosters to operate, vehicles with diesel engines need a separate pump for their vacuum supply. In order for vacuum boosters to operate, vehicles with diesel engines need a separate pump for their vacuum supply. You will see a vacuum pump on a lot of these diesels that have It's got a pulley that looks like a power steering pump pulley. And it's got the same little fancy, attachment up here for pulling it off. And the vacuum pump is going to have a sort of a diaphragm on it, that it's got a hose coming off of it. It's just, I can't draw it, but basically if you see one, it's got a 3/8 hose coming off of it, and it goes to the booster. That's the vacuum pump. And those vacuum pumps go bad. You have to change them.
Is this why on the GMC it asks for with or without air pump?
No, that air pump has got to do with the emission system.
Okay.
But the vacuum, the diesels have got that belt-driven vacuum pump typically. If they've got a vacuum booster, a diesel is going to have a vacuum pump of some kind, and occasionally you'll see one with an electric vacuum pump. But I don't know if I've ever seen one that was made that was electric, was for brakes. Some of the Power Stroke diesels would have a little small vacuum pump that was just for the air conditioner doors in the dash, But anyway, the brake pedal ratio is the ratio of the length of the lever arms on the pedal assembly. Remember the picture I drew about that. All right, you got your brake pedal swings on this. Right? Okay. Here's where your foot's going to be right there. There's a foot. All right. Right here is where the rod is going into your master cylinder. See all the leverage you got there? You got this long lever, and you got it anchored here. And whenever you mash the brake, you're going to see that you're going to be putting a ton of pressure on this. Right. And then all that's multiplied even more by the size of the pistons and Pascal's law and all that. See? So that's just basically, that's the ratio right here. You'd be 8-to-1 or something ridiculous like that.
So that's true.
And, yeah, that is absolutely true. Number 8's true. Adding power steering fluid to the master brake cylinder is a dangerous mistake that can lead to total brake failure.
Sure.
There was a chain store that this woman had her car worked on over there. She wrote me an email through my website, and she was talking about how that right after they worked on her brakes, she drove it and the brakes got to where they just were locked up all the time. The car wouldn't go. It was out there on the freeway and all that. And so she took it had it, tuck on the hook. They put it up on a rollback, dragging the wheels, and put it to the Honda store. And the Honda store wanted a lot of money. I mean, a ridiculous amount of money. You got a radiator for me? All right, and some antifreeze?
Yes.
All right, well, we'll leave it out there and we'll see what we can do to help you out.
All right.
All righty.
Any specific place you want me to lay it?
Just lay it in front of the car.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so, anyway, so she said they were wanting, gosh, it was ridiculous, a ton of money, like $4,000 to fix that. And so she went back to the chain store and she goes, look, I got a $4,000 repair on my thing right after y'all worked on the brakes. And I don't know, she may have drove it 40, 50 miles before all this happened, And they were trying to get out of it. Oh, no, we didn't do that, So anyway, so I told her, I said, why don't you go to sign on this searchautosparts.com website and just tell your story and see what everybody else thinks about it. So there's like 4,000 people have read her story or something. There's a lot of people, and they're all giving her all kinds of advice and everything. But
this was recent.
Yeah, well, more or less. It's probably been a year ago. But anyway, she was thinking somebody had added, like, JT did. She tried to add that stuff there. But it'll make a mess. And you can also always tell if the cap on the reservoir is all swelled up. And somebody put something in there that didn't belong in there. You're better off putting water in there than you are putting oil. I ain't kidding you, I mean, not that anybody would put water in there, but if I was gonna, somebody say, I'm gonna try to ruin your brakes, would you rather me put water in there or oil? So I'll put water in there, because you can, purge that out.
Water will get you out of tight somewhere to mess it up, though.
If you absolutely had to have brakes and you were 20 miles out in the country and were gonna crash and burn or die or whatever without it, yeah, pour you some water in there. You're better off with water than you are some kind of oil. Because you can actually flush that on out of there, A little man named D.D. Crane one time poured his Chrysler, he knew about cars and brakes and all that kind of stuff. And he needed some brake fluid. I don't know why he busted a line or something, fix that. And he said, I just filled it up with water. Bled it all out just like it's brake fluid. He said, I figured I got to rebuild all the brakes and everything because I figured it'd be rusty on the inside. But he said, I drove it around for a couple of weeks like that. And he said, when I flushed it out, there wasn't no rust nowhere. Everything looked real good. Well, there wasn't any oxygen in there. You see what I'm saying? So it didn't oxidize a whole lot. But I'm not telling anybody to put water in their brakes, but what I'm telling you is if you were going to choose between water and oil, you're better off with water than you are oil. Unless it's real cold and then it may freeze, then you ain't got no brakes, and you're gonna crash anyway.
Oh, man.
Best thing to do is keep some brake fluid with you, okay?
Or walk.
You know.
Man, you just slow yourself
Yeah,
down.
keep some brake fluid with you. Don't pour anything in there but brake fluid. Let me, back up and say that. All right, let me say the power piston is the interface between the front push rod and the master cylinder. No, that is not the interface between the front push rod and the master cylinder. Who's that?
Gene.
A tandem diaphragm vacuum booster has one diaphragm instead of two. That's not right either. All right, okay, now then, power boosters are mounted where?
Power booster would be the hydraulic.
Now, power booster would be like a power brake booster. Is it in the passenger compartment on the brake pedal? Is it on the power steering pump? Is it between the brake pedal lever and the master cylinder? Yeah, that's where it is, isn't it? That's a C. It's not on the throttle body. To multiply the force coming from the brake pedal, vacuum boosters rely on what? A temperature differential across the diaphragm, a voltage drop in booster electronic circuitry. Ha ha, that's a joke. Pressure differential across the diaphragm, pressure from the power steering pump.
Pressure differential across the diaphragm.
There you go. Atmospheric pressure is how that's happening. And an undesirable hissing noise caused by air rushing into the chambers of a vacuum booster is prevented by means of a...
Control valve.
Well, actually, it's a filter. If you look on the back of a brake booster, there's a little rubber accordion diaphragm, and there's some little holes in that end of that thing, and it's got little foamy-looking filter stuff in there, and it keeps you from hearing it going shh. Now, if you ever mash the brake, and the whole time you're holding the brake, you hear it going shh, and you got a leaking,
What happens whenever you you apply the brakes and it go like boom? You ever had that happen?
You mean like, I'm not exactly sure what.
No, I mean, it just make a noise, man. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you're hearing something or you're feeling
I guess
something?
that could be the brakes going to be a bad name.
You hearing something or feeling something?
Feeling something through the brake pedal.
What do you mean like, won't, you mean what?
No, it's like a grinding noise, and then it won't stop. I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
It
I'll
happens.
tell you what, you need to pop the wheels off and do an inspection of that. Or that sounds pretty doggone scary there.
Yeah, especially on the Masters Highway.
How many of you know what brake fade is?
Brake pedal fade.
Yeah. No, not brake pedal fade, brake fade. Brake fade. If you actually, like, I was driving a car one time, I guess I was about 16 years old, and I was running about 100 miles an hour. And I decided it was time to stop, so I started. There was nothing in front of me, but I was just going to stop because I was coming up to a place where there was a road. And I didn't want to zip through a stop sign going 100 miles an hour. I was stupid to be going 100 miles an hour to begin with, when I, country road out in the middle of nowhere. But when I hit the brake, and about the time the car, it was long, I was trying to stop pretty quick. The brake pads on that car got hot, and they got to where the car, I had a good hard pedal, but the car was not stopping. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It was still trying to go. And that was because I got the brakes so hot. You get them things hot enough, they won't stop the car, But anyway, that's the thing. Now, another way you can describe fade is when you hit the brake. First time you hit it, it feels like a good pedal, but if you keep your foot on it, it goes away. A lot of times that's what we're talking about.
You got a
Brake.
pump.
Yeah. Well, you got a brake. You got another bite, and it keeps going. That's a bad master cylinder. That's what that is.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So you got a filter there. All right. Let's trash that piece of paper. All of the following are advantages of tandem diaphragm brake booster, except A, the doubling of surface area provides more boost. B, the same boost can be achieved with a smaller diameter booster housing. C, more boost can be achieved through booster housing of the same size. Or D, doubling of surface area provides improved gas mileage. That's going to be a D, All right. So basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to make the diaphragm smaller. I mean, it needs to be packaged smaller so it'll fit in a tighter engine compartment, but it gives you plenty of power assist, right?
So it'll be B.
Yeah, it's a dog. That's the accept thing. Accept that's what it is. To prevent fluctuating manifold pressures from affecting the amount of vacuum available to the booster, vacuum is often stored in a what? What do you store anything in?
You said B or D?
That's a dog. 15 was D. Dog.
How would it improve gas mileage?
Yeah, it doesn't. It's an accept.
Oh, it's,
Yeah. To prevent fluctuating manifold pressure from affecting the amount of vacuum. available to the booster, and we don't want that, you know. You don't want it to, you know, it have to be stored. It's stored often sometimes in a reservoir. A lot of that is stored in the brake booster. The brake booster itself is its own reservoir pretty much, you know, because it's got that little check valve or where the hose goes into it. In a hydraulic booster, boost pressure is obtained from what?
Power steering pump.
Power steering pump, that's right. To isolate the cause of vacuum not being stored in a vacuum reservoir, inspect all of the following except A, vacuum check valve, B, spool valve for sticking, C, vacuum supply line for leaks, or D, vacuum supply hose for soft spots that could collapse during use and restrict flow.
Indeed.
That's basically going to be the B, your stick and spool valve is not going to keep it from being stored. Which one of the following steps is done first when testing vacuum booster operation? That's 19.
Oh, is that the one that?
Remember what I told you?
That's the one you turn off the key and.
There you go. Turn the engine off.
Press down on
That's
the
the
brake
first
pedal,
thing you're
start
going to do is kill the motor. Which of the following steps is done last when testing vacuum booster operation? Evaluate the amount of movement in the brake pedal. You want to know about brake pedal travel. What you're after on that. There's actually a way to measure that. I mean, there's tools for that kind of thing, but most of the time you can feel it with your foot and tell if it's right or not, you know. Anybody got any questions or comments about that?
Is number 7 false?
Number 7 is true.